Okay, trustees, we are live. We are recording. Phone lines are open. Go for it.
Welcome everybody to the regular meeting of the East Hampton Town Trustees of January 23rd, 2023. And I'd like to open the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we'll start with roll call. Marlene, can you do roll call, please?
Certainly. John Aldred,
Yes.
Francis Bach,
Here.
David Cataletta,
Here.
Ed Dollinger, Steve Lionel, Jim Grimes.
Here.
Mike Martinson, Susan McGraw-Keever, and William Taylor.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. And we'll move into public comment. Matt, do we have anybody on the line tonight?
Zero callers right now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Start with Marina DeLuca. Wants to talk to us about ospreys for the group of the East End.
So do I present from here?
Yes, please.
Then I have
And
set.
introduce yourself.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I have a presentation. I'm Marina DeLuca. I'm an environmental associate with Group for the East End. So environmental associate basically means that I do a whole bunch of different things, but one of those projects has been primarily working with the osprey, and Group for the East End is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we have a focus in education, conservation, and advocacy work across the East End of Long Island. So that's my introduction.
Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Just let me know when you advance slides.
Okay. So I'm using my phone to just get a look ahead on my presentation. So that was my intro. Here's our little logo.
Okay.
It's there. It's great. Anyway, I was gonna say next slide. So I figured what I would just start off with, so that everybody's on the same page, is some background information on our beloved osprey, or the fish hawk as it can be called. One of my favorite fun facts is that they actually blink upwards, so they dive for fish, and their eyelids, rather than closing down like ours, go up. This is kind of
That's cool.
offhand, but I think that's a really cool fact.
Yeah.
But essentially, one of the reasons that the osprey are a big focus in conservation is due to their drastic decline due to the use of DDT. So up there in the images, you can see eggs during when DDT was allowed. It caused bioaccumulation, which ended up, the effect of that was softening of the osprey eggshells, which led to the osprey becoming they were severely endangered within New York State, and their population took a significant decline across the country. They've been around for a long time. They used to have a little bit more conflict with humans. People used to collect eggs. I didn't know that was a thing, but it is. So people used to collect eggs, and osprey eggs were coveted for that. Their primary source of food is bunker or menhaden, and they are kind of a general charismatic species of the East End. So next slide. So to go from here, there was originally an estimated of 800 to 1,000 breeding pairs from New York to Boston in the 1940s, and 90% of this population disappeared between 1950 and 1975. The predominant cause of that was the use of the pesticide DDT, as well as some egg collection and conflicts with people. DDT was banned, and the population returned to their original level of 15% of. There was a 15% return to the original population level. Once DDT was banned, their population continued to improve. However, they also took another significant hit in the early 2000s, and we learned that their population is pretty directly linked to bunker and menhaden populations. So after that decline, it led to more restrictions on bunker and menhaden. Now we have a larger bunker and menhaden population, which also leads to a larger osprey population. And they were listed as endangered in 1971. They are up to special concern currently, just for anybody who doesn't know the metric, for a species to be listed as endangered, it means that 75% of the total population would have had to have disappeared. So that's a pretty significant distinction. And for it to be special concern, it still means that their population is significantly less than it was before. So threatened is 50% of the population has disappeared. So special concern is somewhere between 50, 60 to 75% of the population versus an original total. Next slide. So Group for the East End has been working on osprey conservation since the early 70s, and it started off kind of working towards putting up osprey poles, trying to help the species recover. So there was a large push to get DDT banned. That was successful. That was done throughout a number of conservation organizations within New York State and other areas as well on the federal level. And so our primary focus was trying to maintain habitat, put up osprey poles, give them good opportunities for breeding to help that population recover. And then one of the things that we started doing later on, once their population started to kind of balance a little bit, was we started monitoring the population. So that means that every year across the East End from Riverhead east, we do a survey of all of the known nesting birds in the area. So this is from our 2022 monitoring data, and East Hampton had 49 active nests and a total of 84 fledglings that fledged and have gone on to mature. Next slide. So one of the things that the group has been working on beyond just conservation or focus conservation on trying to help their population increase is also hazard mitigation. So as the population of osprey has increased, they have taken to nesting on utility poles, electric poles, chimneys, boats, docks, anywhere that they can get a good foothold. So one of the programs that we've been working on is trying to rectify this issue of the birds nesting on utility poles, because it can lead to their nest catching on fire, and nobody wants to see that. It's a real tragedy. One of the other things that we're beginning to work on is looking at different osprey nests that have a lot of beach trash kind of wrapped up in them, and seeing if in the off season when the birds aren't here, we can try and remove some of that trash in order to make the nesting areas safer for them.
Actually, can I point out something? Ospreys typically do not use beach trash in their nest.
So
And an indicator, when you see plastic, styrofoam, crap, eagles don't care. They will make a nest out of old discarded plastic bags. So I kind of like to see, when you see a little garbage in the nest, sometimes that means they've been competing with a bald eagle to sort of make a home.
yeah, so the eagle population has been coming back out here. It was pretty non-existent. I know specifically on the North Fork, there's 2 or 3 breeding pairs out there now. And the osprey don't often go for beach trash, but they do use sticks. So a lot of cases when you see trash in the nest, it's also because there was rope wrapped around a stick that the bird wanted. So the bird took the stick, and now you have rope in the nest, and it can kind of get pulled out depending on wind and weather and stuff like that. So definitely, it's not like they are predominantly looking for that as their nesting material. They want sticks, but it's something that gets kind of wrapped up by accident. Next slide. So what we did is we worked in conjunction with PSE&G to survey a number of the poles in hotspot areas. So from our previous years of surveying the birds, we have a map that shows kind of all of the general nesting locations from Riverhead East, and we use that as our metric in order to determine where the hotspot locations were. So this was areas typically around marshlands and things like that, where you have a number of birds nesting in the same vicinity. So we went and we looked at a number of different poles in those areas, and we determined them as either higher risk or lower risk. So the higher risk poles are ones like you can see on the left here. So it's where there's no canopy cover. In this case, there was a previous nest that was actually built on the pole. And with the help of PSE&G, we were able to relocate that nest to a nearby man-made osprey platform. And we put up V-guards, which you'll see in the following thing, which is another form of deterrent to try and keep the birds from nesting there again. And the lower risk poles are any poles that have this double cross. So the 2 beams across the top of it, that makes a good base for a nest. But because of the tree cover, that pole was listed as a lower risk, despite being in an osprey hotspot. Next slide. So during 2022, 186 poles were surveyed from Riverhead to Orient and Montauk. We had 4 extremely high-risk poles. Those were poles that had a nest built from a previous year that was relocated. 64 high-risk poles, 72 medium, and 46 low-risk. And with the help of PSIG, 50 mitigation installations were completed. And there were 68 total high-risk poles. So I believe that they covered the rest of those this winter. And we're continuing to work with PSIG. However, a lot of this work is going to start to reduce some of the available nesting locations for the birds. So a lot of them have taken to nesting on utility poles. They're tall, they're high, they're around water. It's perfect nesting habitat for them. But the more poles that are kind of in these prime locations, we're decreasing the available real estate, even if it's for the overall safety of the birds. Next slide. So this is what an installation looks like. The birds can be really tenacious sometimes. So when it's safe to do so, we're able to help PSIG get a platform up on top of the pole so the birds can be above the kind of electrocution zone. And those black guards over the top, I don't know if you've seen them when you're driving out here, but those are the V-guard deterrents. And we've had pretty good success with that, keeping the birds out of kind of the hazardous area on those poles. Next slide. So onward to the implications of this. Like I was talking about before, we're starting to remove available real estate, and more we at Group for the East End. So we've been kind of known as the Osprey people for a long time. So we get a lot of calls in relation to this. And we are seeing more and more birds nesting on people's boats, on the ends of docks, on chimneys, in boat yards, on boats before they get put in the water. So it's kind of an increasing issue. So there's 2 prongs of this. One is that the population is increasing, which is great. However, the more birds you have, the more real estate they're looking for. And then the other component is that as we begin to put up hazard protection on some of the available real estate, which is utility poles in today's day and age, the birds are kind of getting pushed out of that area. They have started to return to nesting in trees, which is great. That's kind of like pre-DDT behavior, which is really awesome. However, we're kind of trying to look down the line, and we're assuming that this, in an effort to prevent them from getting electrocuted, they may start to push closer to people and cause conflicts with them being on boats, docks, etc. Next slide. So part of the reason that we came to you is kind of as a starting point. So I'm not sure if this is exactly within your jurisdiction or something that you'd be looking into, but I figured that you guys were a good kind of first point of discussion in terms of what we're looking to try and do out here for the Osprey. So like I said, the population is going to continue to increase, hopefully. That's kind of what we are looking for. But it also provides more opportunity for human conflict. And at the group, we've seen a lot of conflict can go really well. We had some people that were like, all right, I'm staying off my dock until the birds fledge in August, and they were good with that. They were fine. Other people, not so much. They want to use their boat. The nest disappears somehow. So it's kind of a push and pull. If you get a gentle person, it's great. If you don't, problems can occur. So one of the things that we've been trying to do at Group for the East End is to create education material about the osprey, different ways to deter them from your dock, so that you can kind of try to get ahead of this before the birds are already there setting up shop. And we were hoping that one of the ways that we could work together with the trustees is just in getting some of this information out there to the public. So anything that we can create, we can give to you guys, and you can help give to people who are in kind of the coastal zone along the water where the birds would be nesting. And another component of this is, so in the past, Group for the East End had done some work with the installation of osprey poles. However, as we continue to have an increasingly complicated world, our insurance company is no longer okay with that. We have to be licensed as a full contractor, and we're a nonprofit of about 10 people. So that's kind of a lot for us, especially considering the many other branches of work that we do.
Try and get this closer to the end. Do you have some spots that you would like to make available nesting sites? And if so, I think you could depend on this board to help you, either directly or in cooperation with other, but call them non-for-profits, whether it's Boy Scouts or whatever. But I see the housing crisis, I see the need. There's a lot of competition for nests all over the place. If you've got ospreys that have shown an interest in nesting on a dock or some other areas, they're not terribly difficult to coerce into nesting in a different spot, provided you provide that spot. So maybe it's a reach out to private property owners, maybe some of our property, whatever could be used, and we'd be glad to help you.
Great. I was gonna say, I will wrap up. I'll speed up. But anyway, I was gonna say, we can move through this. This is kind of an example of a pole installation. One of the things to talk about is that the poles generally, one, you can work with donations. So one of the things we did with Shelter Island School District, the school district, their shop teacher loves building the platforms. So they built 4 or 5 platforms and were able to work with some of the Shelter Island leadership to install those. But the pole installation can cost between $800 to $1,000 about if you don't get more materials donated. So that's just a rough estimate. I was asked that at a previous trustee meeting. Next slide. So what I gave you all at the beginning is our newsletter. It has some basic information about the work that we've been doing. It also has a sample program that was done by the Southampton trustees. And that was a way that they had public community members could pay the trustees and have an osprey pole put up, and it would be dedicated to them or somebody that they liked. So I provided you with that sample program. So if it's something that you would like to consider doing something similar, it's just kind of something to think about. Next slide. That's the end of my point. So essentially trying to work with you guys to help increase the available nesting real estate for these birds, as well as put out other education information so that people are aware of them, what they're doing, and we could talk further if it's something that you're interested in, to try to put something together. And the Southampton trustees program, I think, is a really great model of just another way or avenue to get some of those poles installed. So that is
Thank
my,
you.
Are
Yeah,
there-
that's great.
I'd just like to reinforce what Jim's point, which is, if you can come up with sort of a plan, we would be happy to, consider helping out financially.
I think we've all been involved in putting up osprey nests.
At some time or another, but we have the luxury, we've got real estate that's proximate to the water. If you guys have done some monitoring and have some locations or potential locations you're interested in, if it's on our land, I think you can be assured that we'd be more than happy to support it. If it's not on our land, I think you can expect moral support, at least.
We could.
And some of the land that may be public land that's not our land, if you can get a endorsement, or everybody's agreeable. I think this is an easy sell. Okay,
yeah.
Come fuzzy little chicks, if little animals.
Yeah, I was thinking the Surf Rider Club at East Hampton School, we could help put up an osprey nest. That'd be really cool. So
Yeah.
we're on board.
What's specifically your problem with the insurance? They don't want your employees doing?
Yeah.
They
So
don't want you sponsoring it, or?
essentially, we can't be the person to put the pole in the ground anymore, because if the pole falls on somebody else, then we have a problem because we're not a licensed contractor. So that's kind of our dilemma in the ever increasing world. And we're a small nonprofit of 10 people. So to add on the additional.
Yeah, if you lose one, you still got 9.
Should have a designated full person.
Yeah. So that's the running problem. And we've tried to do some work in terms of coordinating with local contractors for people on private property who live adjacent to the water to install a pole if they're able to do that. So that's another thing that we've done. So if you guys have kind of some communication with local contractors as well, I think that's a great kind of sharing resource.
Hey, have PSEG, have they ever coordinated and provided the installation of the pole service for you guys?
They have. Typically, it's in instances where the birds were nesting on the utility.
I know Wilco used to be pretty good at sometimes providing the pole sometimes helping you
Yeah.
put the pole in. They wouldn't make the platform or any of that, but you know, that's pretty easy.
Yeah, we've gotten poles donated before from a number of different avenues, so that's
You
definitely
probably
something.
run into a problem where you don't want to bring equipment to some of the places. You want to put the poles, right?
Yeah, it depends. My dad is Bob DeLuca, so he runs Group for the East End. So I've been around this work for a really long time. And I have old photos of 10 people out in the marsh with me on top of somebody's shoulders trying to get the thing in the ground because he didn't have the equipment out there. So there's definitely kind of a lot of ways to do it. In some cases, you can have the contracting material or tools out there. Other cases, it's a good bit of manpower. But yeah, thank you so
Hey,
much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I don't know if I'm muted or not here, or if you can hear me. Hey, everybody. Hi, trustees. Marina, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for all the work you do. My name is Andy Drake. I'm land steward for Town of East Hampton Nature Preserves and CPF Lands. I was asked by Marina and also Susan to be at this meeting tonight. I couldn't be there in person, but I'm here now. Just wanted to chime in at the end of this presentation to say, basically, the same as all you're saying. I'm happy to help in any way I can on the town side of things. And that would include harvesting black locust poles, trunks to use as poles, or obviously providing physical labor, especially if it's on town land. To my knowledge, we have 5 osprey poles on our town nature preserves, and that's the lease property over by Maidstone. We have one at the Hagerstrom property on Gerard Drive. We have one at Sammy's Beach in the marshland, and one in Miller over at Gerard Drive, and one at Hands Creek Preserve. Those are the 5 poles I know of that are on town property. They may overlap with trustee land as well. I'm not certain of that. Personally, I helped, and my coworker Andy Gates helped with the installation of the new pole at the lease property by Maidstone, and a new install at the Hagerstrom property on Gerard Drive. Other than that, I've helped on land at Hampton Waters on a private island preserve there, and at Lion's Head as well. And those, all these osprey pole projects were typically run by Paul DeAndrea at the Nature Conservancy back in the day, and he would build the platforms and bring them out. We would harvest locust trunks, and we'd build them together and we'd install together. And we're always happy to do it. I worked with Group for the East End at least once or twice on these as well. And just wanted to say, if you ever need help on town lands, or even on the install at a trustee location and just need manpower or material, happy to lend a hand as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I just have one more question too. For the trustees or whoever knows, do you have a record of the poles that are on town property currently?
That's all I have as far as we have the 5 that I just listed.
Okay.
Natural Resources might have some more information as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
I think if anybody has it, it's Paul DeAndrea at Nature Conservancy, and I know he's been retired for a few years, but he's probably got a very good log, and we can reach out to him, or I can put you in touch.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. I know in Southwold, I don't know if we've gotten too many calls in East Hampton. We have some people who are like, we see a pole and it's down and they want it to get put back up, but trying to then find somebody to put the pole up and figuring out whose jurisdiction it is has been a little bit tricky.
Nice thing that you do have is there's quite a bit, and Andy Drake can speak to this. There's quite a bit of what is now nature preserve areas that are close to the water, that it's a real easy lift probably to get the town or the to get the town board to agree to allow additional poles to be installed.
Oh, on preserve land, it's not a problem. If you want to place if it would just go through our department essentially, and then town board approval. But that's not a problem. Yeah, if you pick a location, we'll work to make it happen.
Hey, Andy, you probably have a good idea of some good spots, that might work well. One I can think of is in Montauk, right across from what is it in Stars Development. There's that deeded access to Lake Montauk. That
Mhm.
there's nothing around there. You have easy access to put a pole in. It's town property. It's already nature preserve.
Yeah, we come up with a good list and a good map. I'm certain of it.
Northwest Creek could use one.
Yeah, we
Sure.
could, just a lot of sites.
That would be great if you have some kind of
It's
insight.
good to see them coming back. I mean, we were kind of taking care of the ones that were here. Glad to see a population explosion.
Well, anyway, we could pick this conversation up if you want to
Yeah,
call somebody in our office.
that would be great.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Molly Graffam and Ron Paulson, Georgia Pond Project and boat mooring.
Yeah, let me just sort of set this up. Molly contacted me. She and Ron had given a presentation at the last CPF committee meeting on work they were doing in Hands Creek. And she reached out to me about similar work that they're beginning to embark on in Georgia, and they were looking for permission to use a motor on a boat, do their work and moor it while they're doing some of their research. And I asked Molly and Ron if they would fill us in on the work that they're doing in 3 Mile Harbor as well, because I think it's been a little while since we've been updated on that, so.
Thank you for the introduction, John. My name is Molly Graffam from Cornell Cooperative Extension.
Yeah, Ron Paulson, I work with Cornell. Nowadays as a contractor to them, but I worked for several decades with them directly, but I'm still the same team. It's just structured a little different these days. But we'd like to share what we've been doing. And, you know, I'll give a brief initial introduction and like to pass it off to Molly to go into the specifics of Hands Creek and the proposal for Georgia, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So we use this multi-phased approach to basically this is aimed at nitrogen, and we all know that nitrogen is an issue with the surface waters for various problems, hypoxia and harmful algal blooms and such. And so our efforts over the last, most specifically over the last 5 years have been two things. One is to identify where along the shoreline these areas are most significant and to focus then in the inland areas and to look at ways of which we can either focus where more, you know, something like where you should be looking to upgrade septics maybe more seriously because the impacts are worse, or something we call permeable reactive barriers, which we've been installing, and Molly will explain that more later. But there are remedies or living shorelines or restoring the coast to help mitigate this excessive nitrogen that's coming in. So what we call submarine groundwater discharge, something I've been working with a couple decades in Long Island and throughout the nation really. But basically what we're talking about is where groundwater intersects and discharges along a surface water. And on Long Island, all surface waters have groundwater impacts, lakes, ponds, estuaries, rivers, and it's a significant contributor to contaminants or nitrogen in most areas. And it basically occurs within the first, let's say 100 feet of the shoreline, but that could be directed offshore in some cases because of marshes and clays and things. So the diagram kind of indicates, you know, the area of discharge. And as you move offshore, there's actually a recirculation of the seawater getting into the bottom, mixing with the groundwater. So This whole zone is kind of dynamic and needs to be interpreted, carefully if you're going to try to pinpoint along a large embayment or lake or pond where you should really be focusing your efforts, because it's not the same. The modeling is great, but the modeling makes a lot of assumptions. So this work was really, done in conjunction with the modeling. Next slide. So yeah, we've been proposing this in several embayments now. We've done Hog Creek, very similar work. We're currently in 3 Mile Harbor. And Molly will go into a little more of the results from some of that we'd like to share and just give you an overview. And we're proposing the same kind of evaluation for Georgica. And the whole idea again is to focus where, we can suggest or focus on, mitigating some of that nitrogen either through changes in inland practices or actual treatments of that water. Next slide. So how do you do this? So the instruments we use are something been actively developing over, again, several decades. And really what we do, what's important to do is to use something as the probe you see to the left. It's been coined as the Trident probe. And that what it does is you see that black plate at the bottom. Well, that's a stopper plate, and you see the probes beneath that. They go into the bottom about a foot and a half. And we make measurements of those bottom pore water fluids. Pore water is the water trapped in the sediment. It's groundwater that's about ready to emerge into the surface water. And so we can take advantage of the fact that groundwater stays pretty much in the 50-degree range, and surface waters can be much warmer or cooler than that. And so when we put these probes in, we measure the temperature and the conductance or the salinity of those fluids. In areas where there's groundwater discharge, you'll see that contrast compared to a surface water with high salinity or warmer or cooler water. So that's been very effective to map out where this pore water is coming through. And so that probe is one of the things we do is these transects along the bottom, starting at the shoreline, working offshore. And, throughout the embayment, and they give us maps of where the groundwater is focusing. Next slide. So the other part of this, it's great to know where groundwater is discharging. And we take samples of that discharge with those probes on the previous slide. So now we know where the groundwater discharge is strong. And we also have chemistry data that tells us where, how much nitrogen was in that pore fluid. But what we don't know is the rate at which it's discharging. And so to really be able to determine how many pounds of nitrogen are coming through along a shoreline, you need to measure the seepage rate, we call it. So it's the rate at which that groundwater is emerging out of the sediments. And we use ultrasonic seepage meter that's pretty sophisticated and sensitive to measure that. And essentially the instrument has a funnel on the bottom, and the funnel gets implanted into the first 4 or 5 inches of the sediment. It funnels that groundwater through a flow tube that uses this ultrasonic technology to measure that rate. And that rate could be influenced by the inland hydraulics, by tides, by changes in water heights. And it's very useful to know what that is, because then with the chemistry data, you can determine, these areas out there that are focal points. And typically they are areas within tribs or coves that for different reasons, the hydraulics or the geology, or just the shape of the shoreline, or whether there's a marsh present or not, the sediment types, So what we eventually come up with then is a map, and Molly will go show some examples of that. So that's kind of an overview of what we've been doing, and I'll pass it off to my colleague.
Next slide. I just wanted to emphasize that the Georgia Pond project, the phase 1 work that Ron just described, is going to be funded through the Peconic Land Trust. They have private donors that have helped fund this work. And all of this is geared towards finding areas for remediation to impart water quality improvements and find these areas for remediation that will impart the most water quality improvements. So we're looking for areas that are highly focused, targeted, that we can use this information to then go forward with installing remediation. And we have quite a bit of work to get through. So that's why we're here to ask specifically to get into the details of we need a mooring to moor the boat that we plan to use to get this work done. And again, all of this work provides data to help provide the data to take actionable steps towards remediation, but whatever data we do generate is going to become publicly available as well. And we definitely can add our data to any existing repository of publicly available data. Next slide. So just to get into the details, we would greatly appreciate, and why we're here today is to ask you for permission to moor our boats and use motorized boat in Georgia Pond. This would allow us to do
Yeah, I don't want to speak for everyone. I don't think we'd have any problem with mooring, but the motor thing, you're gonna have to, we've had battles with the town board over it, so.
Well, I think we have given permission recently to Brad Peterson
Peterson,
for a motor.
It has to be 10 horse or less.
When are you planning on doing this?
We'd like to start as soon as possible, so spring 2023.
Okay, well, I would ask that we wait until after duck season, which is only a few more days.
Oh, of course.
And after that time, I don't have a problem.
Do you have an engine that you plan to use?
Yeah, we use Carolina skiff type boats, 18-foot shallow draft with 40, 50 horsepower motor.
No,
They
not
want
even, not
the town, the town code won't allow
The
it.
town code is gonna be a problem. Do you have access to like an electric motor?
Some of the smaller boats do.
Yeah, we allow up to a 10 horse, so.
Yeah.
I think Brad's was a 9.9 or something like that.
Yeah, whatever, up to 10 horse.
There's a section of the town code that limits the amount of horsepower that's legal on Georgia Pond for most of the year, so. Have you talked to all the property owners around there about
No, we haven't talked
access
to all
and
of
things
them.
like that?
Well, that was the other question, is where are you gonna take your access into Georgia Pond?
So you mean to drive the boat into
Where do you
Georgia
wanna
Pond?
put the mooring?
Well, we want to
Yeah.
put the mooring off of the Peconic Land Trust property in Talmadge Creek. We are already doing some work off of
It's like
their
your own
property.
It's property you control.
Yeah, the
Peconic
only
Land
thing,
Trust.
the only deal off of Talmadge Creek, depending on whether the pond is out, right now it's closed. But if, like, we'll be letting that pond mid-March. When we let the pond, that boat's gonna be high and dry.
Yeah, we've worked in there during those low periods, and we would try to moor the boat towards the southern end of the property. And then what we found was there's always 8-10 inches of water there that we can walk the boat out
Yeah, it's kind of,
to where.
it's kind of mucky bottom there.
Yeah, it is, but we've kind of been through that.
Okay,
Unfortunately.
no, you know what I was
You know
gonna,
what you're doing.
no, you know what I was gonna, you know what I was gonna see, what I was gonna suggest is it's a little hard to launch your boat in there depending on the level of the pond. That's one. The other is it's somewhat an attractive nuisance from a mooring standpoint. We probably could talk with the Georgia Association and perhaps, you could use where they launch their beetle boats, which is just, it's not very far from it. And it would probably be a good spot for your mooring. You know, you're close enough to where you're doing your work.
Yeah, that would be a great help because we haven't had much luck getting contact there. So if you guys can help us with that, we'd
Be glad to help.
that would be really a big help.
Mhm.
You know, this was our second choice. So,
Okay.
Georgia Association, Georgia, Friends of Georgia Pond and stuff are, you know, they're a great asset.
Mhm.
They're as interested as anybody else in the universe, keeping the pond nice.
If you call the office, Allison will give you my number and I can put you together with some of the folks in the association.
Okay, so
What's
the
that?
mooring
I can put
location.
them together in an email too.
Okay, however you want to do it.
Whatever is easiest.
I'm kind of a phone call sort of guy.
So the motor itself cannot be less than 10,
Cannot be more than 10.
cannot be more than 10.
Yeah. I mean, a 18-foot Carolina skiff in general might be a little bit of a big boat for some of those small areas you're working in. I don't know if you have access to a
We do have,
Aluminum.
yeah, we do have
14-foot
John
aluminum
boats.
boat with a 9.9 on it. That might be
yeah,
a lot easier all around. I don't know if that, what your carrying capacity needs to
Do
be.
you have anything, you know, it doesn't look like you have any huge.
the biggest issue we have with the boat is that the seepage meter is kind of heavy and we use a davit system. It weighs over 100 pounds to lower it in, take it out of the bottom. That's really the reason we use these skiffs. You know, we might be able to take those motors off, put a smaller motor on. You know,
It's going to take you a little longer to get.
yeah. We do have I have a 6 or 7 horsepower one that probably be good enough. I mean, it's a pond, you know, it's not just, you know, we're not gonna be speeding around it either way, you know? So we might be able to have, if need be, you know, just with smaller motor that meet the requirements.
Since right now you're testing restricted to Talmadge Creek, or do you have some other areas?
No, we plan to do the whole pond.
I
Okay,
think those
Yeah.
are the transects. Those are the transects you plan?
Yeah, there's red lines. They're a little bit hard to see, but it's throughout the entire pond. We plan to do a comprehensive survey. So that's why getting around in some of these larger boats might make it a
okay.
bit
So
easier.
these
but-
probes go in, how long do they stay in the pond?
Well, the thing we call a trident probe system I showed you, that just gets put in for temporary for maybe 20 minutes.
Oh, okay.
And then you pull that out.
You
put
get a
it up, go-
conductivity. It's the same thing we're using out in the P, right?
Yeah.
So you don't leave a bunch in the pond?
No, there's
One at a time?
nothing, except the seepage meter usually stays out for a day.
The trident, you put it in, you see how much current is going through it, you take it out.
And
And
then-
it gives you whether it's, you know, how conductive the water is, and then you figure out how slim the salinity from it.
So you think you get this done in this one season, summer 23?
Well, our plan is to take some seasonal measurements, so it could extend into 2024 if, you know, we'd like to collect some stations over multiple seasons, basically. So the bulk of the work will happen this year.
Are you gonna keep it rainfall related in any way?
Keep it what related?
Are
I'm
you
sorry.
gonna, you gonna correlate it with the rainfall?
We
Well-
typically,
Georgia Pond is really influenced by rain.
It's rain and the height of the groundwater table. Seasonal, you know, we're coming up on the high point for the groundwater in March, April. So we'd like to capture that. And then we like to look towards the end of the summer because there's different dynamics. And what you see in the spring will be slightly different than the fall, and we'd like to have that picture. Those are the two main seasons that we focus on. And as we learn what's going on out there, we've already identified these hot spots, and those are the ones we revisit, not everything. You know, like we'll know, hey, this is an area very active, a lot of nitrogen. We want to learn more about that. So we go back only to, mostly to those areas, not, the whole survey is to get the big picture. And then we refine that. And that targets the next level of, maybe a CPF project to remediate or to do some coastline work.
Yeah, I guess we've done a lot of work around there. A lot of people have done a lot of work. We want to make sure it's all coordinated.
Yeah.
So is this something you're looking for permission from us tonight on?
The mooring itself, yes.
Okay.
I wanted to make a motion also to, give them permission to do this work in general, including using the boat with the engine and the ability to moor it.
So anyway, you're making a motion? I'll second it.
All in favor?
Only thing we ask is give us a, commencement date, 24 hours before. And are you guys using any subcontractors? Well, you said you're a
Well, I
subcontractor.
subcontract to them.
You got workers' comp, and general
Yeah,
liability?
I have all
Okay, well,
businesses.
yeah,
totally
okay, we'll need a
insured.
copy of that.
Yeah, that's fine.
If you don't mind giving us an occasional report on how
Yeah.
you're doing.
Absolutely. That's the fun part. We get to tell you how everything's going.
Yeah, and you
So-
gave a really good presentation on Accabonac Harbor a while back. Remember that's the Accabonac Protection Committee, and they're doing similar, at Accabonac too.
Yeah, I do have more slides from 3 Mile Harbor if you'd like to see them.
Yeah, I
Otherwise,
think
if we.
I think we would benefit from seeing the work.
Okay.
They've done some work in 3 Mile. They're a little more, down the road with that work. So they come up with hotspot areas.
I can go quickly through them. Next
Go
slide.
quickly, we have other people.
Jim's hot to get on.
No, it's not that. It's just we have other people. I think it's just unfair to occupy too much time with one particular.
Just give you an overview so you get a taste of.
Clean some ducks or something?
Next slide.
No, it's just.
No, I know.
Just wanted to give you an update in 3 Mile Harbor. We recently finished a innovative permeable reactive barrier using an injection approach. We worked with CDM Engineering Company and a subcontractor, I think it's called TWS Engineering. They did the carbon injection, but this was based on results that, as Ron had described, we used this siting method to then site the area where we wanted to install a remediation. And we worked with the town of East Hampton Natural Resources Department, and this was funded through the DEC WQIP. And it was years in the making, and it finally was just installed this past December. So we're really excited about this project. And it's an innovative approach. It was not very invasive to the wetland. It was installed in an area where there was a groundwater nitrate plume, and we also know there's an ammonium plume in the area. So we are looking to potentially expand as we work on other piloting methods to address the ammonium issue as well. So PRBs are specifically good for nitrate remediation, but this ammonia issue comes up as well. So we find ammonium in the groundwater as well. But this was a huge success, and we're excited to be
Give some
monitoring that now.
post-installation testing that demonstrates that it's working.
It literally was just installed, so we haven't gotten a chance to put that data and get the samples together yet for that. But we, in our next presentation, we'll have data about the performance of this
Can't
system.
really blow the candles out on that cake just yet.
Not yet.
No, we have been monitoring the bulkhead permeable reactive barrier. I think you may have seen presentations where we talked about that one as well. That one is performing well still. So we have a lot of performance data on that. That was installed in 2020. So we have a couple of years worth of data now on that, and that one's working. This is an innovative new approach. And so we're looking forward to collect that data and see how that one performs as well. Next slide. In 3 Mile Harbor, we were focusing on Sunset Cove and Hands Creek. Next slide. Basically, we started this survey September and worked through November. We ended up getting over 50 stations done where we sampled for field parameters in the 2 creeks. And we have over 30 stations where we sampled for pore water nitrogen. Next slide. So this is just showing basically maps of our station locations in both of the different creeks. And these are the type of maps that we produce that, will eventually be showing you for Georgia. This is what they look like. Basically, we, create these maps with our different sampling locations. Next slide. And then this is showing the nitrate data. So we have a light peach color, meaning there's less than 1 milligrams per liter of nitrate. A orange color is 1 to 5 milligrams per liter nitrate, and the bright orange color is 5 to 20. So in most of the areas, we did see less than 1, but we found specific hotspots where there was 1 to 5, and then in some areas, there was more than 5 milligrams per liter of nitrate. So that those are really excessive nitrate concentrations. We found 17 milligrams per liter in the pore water. That's really excessively high. So we're going to be focusing on those two areas, one along the shoreline in Hands Creek, and then one we found that shoreline point in Sunset Cove. That was actually right near a bulkhead as well. So there's potential for possibly a bulkhead PRB if we've already contacted the property owner there, and we're going to keep talking to the property owner to see if they would be interested in letting us pursue that area if we end up finding consistently high nitrate values there. This is just one sample, so we do plan on sampling it a few times to see if this nitrate persists. Next slide. We also just throughout our survey, we will be doing this in Georgia Pond as well, but we take a sediment core to look at what the sediment properties look like, and we can see that it's very, it's not always the same. There's very sandy areas, there's very muddy areas, and we can kind of delineate the groundwater discharge zone using some of this data as well. Next slide. This is just showing the same plots that I showed, but now I added in, there's the blue dots show potential groundwater cluster wells where we plan on installing a groundwater well based on the pore water data so that we can get a better sense of the nitrogen plume in those specific zones. So that's kind of taking it a step further, moving inland based off of the offshore data. Next slide. Okay, that was basically the quick summary. So we've identified areas in both Sunset Cove and Hands Creek with high nitrogen loading. We continue to collect data over multiple seasons. This approach is really unique in that we are collecting data that we can calculate exactly pounds of nitrogen entering in this specific area. And those are the pounds that we could potentially remediate with shoreline remediation, such as permeability or reactive barriers, but those are just one approach that we can provide recommendations on. This information will be useful to say, oh, well, homes upgrading of these areas, those should really be focal points for septic improvements or improved fertilization practices and such. So this practice just uniquely integrates groundwater, pore water, and surface water data to directly inform the remediation placement and design. And it's relevant for septic system upgrades, shoreline PRBs, habitat restoration, bioextraction, and other methods as well. And we will again be delivering this data to you, to the town of East Hampton, to the Peconic Estuary Partnership. The Peconic Estuary Partnership is funding this 3 Mile Harbor work that I just showed through community preservation funds, I believe in. And all of this work is to support long-term management as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, next we have Robert, and I'm sorry I can't read your last name. And you want to do a presentation on yours?
Hi, my name is Robert Basilov. I'm a sheet metal worker and an operating engineer. As well, I'm founder of Save Environmental, which is a for-profit company. My invention is in sowing eelgrass seeds by attaching them to live hatchery clams. I'm looking for your support and your approval to work with the trustees, the East Hampton Shellfish Hatchery, and my company with support from Cornell Cooperative Extension to do this work on the bottomlands in the Peconic Bay on permanent sites that are held by the East Hampton Hatchery. In doing this work, I developed it. I've scaled it to do it on a large scale. I have 5 open water trials that I performed already. My first was in 2018 in the Peconic Estuary on the north side by Sterling Harbor. It was a small planting, about 500 seeds with about 150 clams. It's still growing to this day. Again, in 2020, I worked with Brad Peterson from Stony Brook, and in Western Tiana Bay, we did about a ½ acre, about 4,000 clams with seeds attached to them. And that's still growing to this day. It's doing very well. And then in 2021, I did a 1 acre plot with the Nature Conservancy in the Great South Bay with the same method. And that's doing really good. And that planting, I did an outreach with the Hampton Bay High School Science Club, where I brought clams, there's glue that I use, and seeds into the classroom. And in about an hour and a half, about 25 students put together 1,024 clams. And that all went into the Great South Bay, and it's doing very well. Again, in 2022, I did 2 open water plantings, again with the assistance of Hampton Bays High School Science Club. That was about 8,000 seeds attached to 800 clams, and that one in its own plot in the Great South Bay. And that was a real good experiment because it was seeds that were collected from right near the high school in Shinnecock Bay, and they were used effectively 9 months later, which is a long term for seeds to last that long without rotting. That's a big problem with the germination with seeds. Is they only last about a season.
Well, eelgrass seeds.
Eelgrass seeds, and then
What kind of, do you have an idea when you say project's doing really well? Do you have some data in terms of percentage of germination, percentage along, 1 year survival, percentage of 2 year survival, and what kind of, densities we're getting out of this?
I don't have scientific data. I just have observations from Brad Peterson and Stephen Schott from Cornell and Chris Pickrell and Carl LeBou from the Nature Conservancy and soundkeeper Bill Lucy. Just their observations. No one's written a scientific paper, a peer-reviewed paper yet. I tried to do that with Brad Peterson, and to this day, I still don't have that data.
But it's not easy.
Well, they need to get paid. I don't have the money to pay them. I just have great ideas. But my work ethic is to do more than I did the year before. So this past year, I built a machine to deploy this work on a very large scale. So we did a collaboration with Save the Sound, soundkeeper Bill Lucy, Cornell Cooperative Extension, with help from the Nature Conservancy, and Rob Trotter, legislator. So we did 10,000 clams with about 10 seeds on them. With the use of this machine, we planted a 2 acre site on the North Shore in Smithtown Bay. And the results of that aren't in because we got to wait for it to grow. But it's a more productive operation. To do the work, I need to have permits to use clams in the waters anywhere in New York. You have to have a permit to deploy clams.
This last project you just mentioned, who and said the results aren't in, who's monitoring?
Oh, the primary investigator is Steve Schott from Cornell Cooperative Extension.
So he's gathering the data on success to measure the success of this project?
Yes, and he's made observations on other plantings that I've done, but no paper has been written at this point. Well, to go forward this year, I have a dive team of volunteers to collect seeds. And my plan is to collect seeds from the northern side of Cedar Point. There's a 50 acre eelgrass meadow there. I don't know if you know, but the Peconic Estuary is losing 10% a year of eelgrass. The South Shore is about 7% a year. And as well, in a study that they did with flyovers from 2000 to 2017 or 2018, the Great South Bay, which is the largest extent of eelgrass in New York, lost 50% due to algae blooms, high water temperatures, fishing practices, disease, and storms. So there's a lot of factors that are taking out eelgrass. And, the Peconic Bay is no exception. So what I'm doing is proposing to work with Barley Dunn, the director of the East Hampton hatchery, to use the clams from the hatchery.
What size clam are you seeding?
I'm trying to use 30mm clams, which is a overwintered clam. It's a year and a half to 2 years old. What I'm looking to do is have the clams survive and be successful, because my whole innovation works on the symbiotic relationship between shellfish, the clam, and the plant. The plant produces oxygen, which the clam needs, and the clam's excrement is nitrogen to help the plant grow, as well as the clam is filtering the water, allowing more sunlight in that the plant needs for photosynthesis. And with this is how I came up with this innovation is I kept on revolving around clams. And then I just came up with, what if I just glued these seeds to the clam and dropped them in the water? And that's basically what I've been doing. So I've been in contact with Barley Dunn. He instructed me that I needed to get approval from the town trustees of East Hampton. And I would like your permission to continue to work with Barley Dunn. And I think he might be calling in tonight if you have any questions of him. But
Do you have a site for this? You have a spot?
well, there's site selection when it comes to eelgrass restoration. You want a site that is conducive for eelgrass to grow. So site selection is something that I would have to look with Cornell Property Extension, Steve Schott, to pick out all the permitted areas where would be a good location and a place that eelgrass is being lost, that we could do this restoration work adjacent to where it's still existing.
Okay, would this be in East Hampton town waters?
Yes.
So it's within our harbors
Yes.
as opposed to in the bay?
As a child, I did a lot of camping with my family in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, and even with my family that I have now at Cedar Point. And I know Cedar Point like the back of my hand. I have hundreds of days camping there. And as a kid growing up, I did observe a lot of eelgrass.
Yeah.
But Northwest Creek is no longer, it's devoid of eelgrass. Can I plant there? Maybe. Will it work? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe the water gets too warm to hold eelgrass. Eelgrass has a thermal limit of about 75, 80 degrees for after a couple of weeks. It will just die off.
Maybe you could do what's tough. You know what's really tough is there's eelgrasses found from whatever all the way down to the Chesapeake and farther south. They experience higher water temperatures than we do.
It's a different strain.
It's a different strain. Has there ever been any attempts at whether
Bring
it's
it up.
hybridization?
It's hard to transplant.
There is a program they're working on now to look at the genetics of the two strains. There's been a resistance to just, let's bring some southern eelgrass up and try it here.
We
they're
tried
looking at
something
the
like
genetics.
years ago. We tried moving some stuff and it doesn't move well.
Well, this is real. I was gonna say,
a lot of the attempts at revegetating areas with the eelgrass have always been kind of mixed. If this is working well, I think it's great.
What drew me to doing this work is that I knew that it was missing. And I was asked if I could figure out a better way to do this. This group Save the Sound would be all for it. And I really put my head into it. And this is what I came up with.
yeah, I was just gonna say, this is really important because it's the nursery of all shellfish and finfish, the eelgrass. And, growing up, I always hear there used to be so much eelgrass. Now there's not that much around. So I think this is a really important project if we could figure out.
Make a motion.
Yeah, I make
You have a
a,
size of a area that you.
I would like to do a
Fine.
2-acre plot with 10,000 to 20,000 hatchery clams.
You think you're talking about in, by Northwest?
I'm gonna collect the seeds from the north side of Cedar Point, the peninsula. There's a 50-acre eelgrass beno there. So I'm gonna bring volunteer divers there to collect these seeds. And then after I collect them, I gotta bring them to either Cornell Cooperative Extension or
So you're
Two other
you're
facilities.
talking about out in the bay? You're gonna collect them
Yeah,
Yep.
north
Yeah.
of Cedar Point.
just off of Cedar Point
There's a
there
big
out in the
bed
bay?
out there, yeah.
Yeah,
the
So
work
what
I do doesn't cause any harm if it doesn't work.
right, so instead of doing one spot with 2 acres, why don't we, instead of putting all our apples in one basket, what if we did like 4 places, quarter acres? For half acre,
I'm up for that.
at least maybe then 1 or 2 will work, and then you're gonna add more to that area.
Well, to me, a full acre of eelgrass is 10,000 plants. Is a, not completely full,
it's
but
modest, really.
in the first, it's a 2-year plant. So in its first year, it will have maybe 4 or 5 leaves. It will only grow so tall. Its second year, its roots will go out 2 feet in all directions and it'll send up sprouts. And it'll be more like a bush where it has maybe 100 to 250 blades of grass coming up. So it will go about 2 feet, maybe 3 feet of a bush type look to it. And then it will produce its own seeds and then it'll self-replicate. That's the goal. That's the goal.
And listen, if you need to do some, if you want to do some photography on this, I'll be more than happy to.
He's the
That'd be
dive,
great.
he's the dive guy.
I have some drone footage of the Great South Bay area site. Gonna have more this year. I have drone footage of the North Shore site in Smithtown Bay. Smithtown Bay is a very high turbulence area. It's the strategy that I used was to go deep. Here in the County Estuary, the water's shallow where the eelgrass grows. So it's about, having a defense system, a good strategy for where I'm planting. On the South Shore, I didn't plant too close to the shoreline because I wanted to stay away from the heat. I didn't go too deep because I wanted not to have a problem with algae blooms. Here in the Peconic Bay, there's some algae blooms. There's high heat. The migration of the dying of eelgrass in the Peconic Bay is going from west to east rapidly. There is no more eelgrass in the Peconic Bay until you get to like the eastern side of Shelter Island. It's disappearing at a rate of 7%. Not to sound like a broken record, but there are no real means to really repopulate eelgrass other than transplanting. Other means of seed broadcasting don't work around this area. It might work in Virginia. It might work in some other parts in the world, but it does not work. It's been tried and tried here in New York. It just doesn't work. So Stony Brook and Cornell are the only ones that do eelgrass restoration. They're regulated to doing transplants. I don't think anyone believes we're going to transplant their way out of this mess. But to go over some of the fine points of how important and the function, the ecosystem services of eelgrass. One, it is habitat, and it's also a nursing area. So it's habitat for predators and prey, and it's a nursing area. As well, it produces oxygen, and then it slows down erosion. So it's a great idea for a natural based solution to slow down erosion instead of hardened shorelines, to have eelgrass as a buffer, which collects sediments and builds up an area. And then the most important thing that eelgrass does that's come about in the last 4 or 5 years is the amount of carbon it sequesters. It sequesters carbon 35 to 50 times more than a terrestrial rainforest, which is a great benefit. And there is nothing that really gets carbon out of the water. Maybe they can make machines that take it out of the air. Maybe we could reduce our emissions. But once this carbon comes from the atmosphere and lands in the water, it causes carbonic acid, which lowers the pH to more acidic level. So there's scientific modeling that shows on the Western Atlantic coast that by 2050, we won't have eelgrass sets anymore. I'm sorry, shellfish sets anymore. They'll just melt away because the acidic level will drop to a 7.9. At that point, that's it for shellfish. So, and then in the farms, we'll have to grow them for 2, maybe 3 years before they can put them out in the open water so they can deal with that ocean acidification. So when eelgrass absorbs that carbon, it's directly stopping carbonic acid from occurring, thereby neutralizing ocean acidification. So eelgrass is kind of like a miracle plant. It's been largely ignored. It's under the sea. No one really sees it, but most fishermen are aware that of its importance for fish habitat. And it's good for tourism, recreational fishing, and commercial species.
I make a motion for safe environment to work with barley and
I'd like to give, a sort of an informal go-ahead for this, but I'd like to see, with barley, come up with a plan, so that we can see exactly what you want to do, where you want to do it.
Do you
how
need
long
any
you wanna do
permits
it.
from the state or anything to harvest?
Permits from the DEC, which I obtained last year. They didn't go in my name. They went underneath Cornell Cooperative Extension. And Stephen Schott from Cornell Cooperative Extension is the primary investigator. He's going to do the monitoring, and he'll make a report, and he'll submit that to the DEC. I am in contact with Chelsea Miller from the DEC that's in charge of shellfish, and Wade Carden. And I recently, talked to them, what do I need to do this elsewhere? And they said that I just need to get an amendment on any bottomland aquaculture permits. So it's just so they know what I'm doing, where I'm doing. The glue I use for this is a non-toxic biodegradable glue. It's called cyanoacrylate. It's used in fish tanks to glue corals to rocks.
is that Gorilla Glue?
No, that's toxic. And then the seed collection is done with volunteers. And then I and a couple other volunteers will maintain the seeds in a bubbling tank of salt water, either at Cornell, or we could do it at the hatchery in East Hampton, or I have a facility with the Nature Conservancy in Sable.
Yeah. How much have you talked about this with barley?
We had a couple conversations about it, and he said, coming up with 10,000 clams that are 30 millimeters in size isn't a problem. And I also discussed that we could use some, fresh flowing saltwater tanks to store the seeds. They have to be cleaned up a little bit. They have to be separated from the rest of the plant matter. That's a process that takes 1 to 2 months. And then I have more volunteers that, we sit down at any location and we take these live clams, lay them out on a table, and I have a gluing process that's pretty simple that even children could use it in schools. And we could produce a tremendous amount. So, and then I have a machine that I built. It's a small machine, and it's a dispersal machine. So what it does is it spreads the clams apart from each other in a rapid succession. So in about 20 minutes, we put 10,000 clams through the machine and covered a 2-acre area. We're doing 400-foot runs, did about 8 runs, and they were all done. So it's not dangerous on the water. Scuba divers for transparent things, a lot of underwater work. So it's a minimal time on the water, but it still has to use scuba divers to collect seeds.
Okay. Sounds like
Excuse
you
me,
got a-
trustees. I know there's a motion on the
Yes.
floor, but we do have a caller holding. It might be Barley.
Yes. Please let him through.
Okay. I'm going to unmute last 4 digits. 2914.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, Barley.
Okay, hey, thanks. Sorry I couldn't be there. I had some other commitments, but I just wanted to voice my support for Rob's project. I've spoken to him a few times, and I saw a few years ago the article about the Hampton Bays project when they were working with Rob, and I was intrigued. He's obviously passionate. We've had a few conversations about this, and as you can see, he's passionate about it. And I think it's worth a shot. It's not a heavy lift for us. We could easily transfer 10,000 or so of our overwintered clams, which are just about the size he's looking for. And I think it would be easy to garner some volunteers from our, our oyster gardener base and school groups and get this going, and hopefully it clicks. So I'm available for questions. I'm happy to work with Rob to figure out some locations for it. We were talking about Napeague as one, probably down near the road end, Napeague Harbor Road end as one site, because it had the most recent eelgrass, and there's actually a pretty decent eelgrass bed down there in the southeast corner. So yeah, just wanted to voice my support, and it sounds like you're supportive, so I'll work with Rob and hopefully get this going for this upcoming summer.
All right, thank you.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Sounds like we're good to go.
That's great. Thanks for
Thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to working with you all, and I'm also looking forward to showing you what we could do to restore our waters.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. All right. Matt, do we have anybody else on the phone lines?
0 additional callers. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, looks like we don't have anything under old business. Let's start with this. I had a conversation probably a month or so back with Scott DeBriner at InterScience, and we were talking about some of these high maintenance properties that they work on, in particular 85 West End Road and 93 West End Road, where they keep coming back every year to renew permits for their revetments and the dunes. And we were discussing the possibility of a multi-year permit. So I thought we might want to start that conversation here.
This is something we've kind of mulled around before, and I think on this particular property, a multi-year permit would certainly apply. I think they've just recently got a DEC permit, multi-year DEC permit, to perhaps we do something that aligns with that, with that permit.
You know how long that permit is for?
I think it might be 5 years.
5 years?
It's
Yeah, that's
10
kind of
years.
like what I was thinking.
10?
Their DEC is 10.
No,
They have a 10, so we do 5 to start.
do a 5. I mean, I would have, you know, the reality is, these two particular properties, they're both owned by the same individual. They come in on an annual basis. Basically, it's a condition of their revetment permits to keep the revetments covered with sand. So we typically see this on an annual basis. They come in every March, they cover the sand, they plant beach grass, they install snow fencing. Some years it's very, very successful and they're able to build the beach out. Other years it gets gnawed back, but it's a pretty disciplined operation that, as far as I can remember, has never gone off without it, you know, with a problem. It's
The other thing running around in my head is if there are other properties.
I'm sure there are.
I'm sure there are too, and I think it might be helpful to think about trying to coordinate all these permits into the same multi-year time frame, so we don't.
There's, you know, I'm gonna be honest with you, John, I know what you're trying to do. Unfortunately, the other permitting agencies do not coordinate in the same fashion, so these properties are permitted when they're permitted. It is not to say at some point down the road that couldn't be done, but I think the practical reality here is that unless the properties were permitted at the same time, probably by the same permitting agent, that's going to be a pretty hard thing to do.
These people have established a really good track record.
And I don't think these multi-year permits are for every application that we get before us, because
First time somebody shows up, it's probably not a good idea,
Yes.
but
Oops, I'm sorry.
We're doing this with the Mendelmans.
Yeah.
marinas,
Yeah.
right? And what I'm finding is that, you know, everybody forgets. I forget. Lean and Allison forget. Mark and Peter forget. And so it's like every once in a while, we have to kind of, okay, what did we do on 3 Mile Harbor Marina versus Harbor Marina with this? We gave you a
But you can
3-year
program
here and a
an annual
5-year.
calendar that gives you
No, but
reminders
with
on
those
critical
marinas, what
dates.
we're trying to move towards is give the same 5-year maintenance permit for all the marinas or the ones they want, under the same 5 years. So it's not, we don't have, well, 3 years later, we have to come back with a 5-year extension on this marina.
Well, I don't know that you really can go with something like that, because even in the case of the Mendelmans, they own multiple properties that are and they are managing multiple DEC and Army Corps permits on those properties that have different D days.
Different starting dates too.
Well,
So, you know, so
that's what sets the whole thing in motion. So I think it's.
Well, I guess then my question is it advantageous for us to go to a multi-year permit system if it's not going to be any easier to keep track of than the annual permit?
Listen, everybody has things in their lives or their businesses that need to be tracked either on an annual basis, on a several year basis. And I think we could impart something on our own bookkeeping system that allows us to do that.
But the thing that I think makes it a little more difficult for an elected board to do is it's always turning over.
Don't ever look at the elected board. Look at the principles that are constants. Our secretarial staff is that constant. And the best thing we can do is to
set up a system
through that. You're right. Every 2 years, our board has the potential to change. And this way, the institutional memory remains sound, and we can track it.
I mean, quite frankly, the reason this conversation came up between Scott and I is because he was attempting to renew their permit from last year, which had been closed. And apparently every year they've been coming here and closing the permit at the end of the project.
Mm-hmm.
And then the following year we would renew it. But if you close a permit, it's gone. You can't renew a permit that's gone. So we've been renewing a permit that didn't exist. So really, I thought maybe at least the permit would be in place with this. We'd figure out what kind of fee structure we want to do. They will do a notification each time they do work on it. And they would give us all the information of each.
What they've done.
Yeah.
So that's similar to what we did with Harbor Marina.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So what do you say we table this for a moment,
Mm-hmm.
try and put together a set of criteria and policy, come back and vote on it?
Yeah, just wanted to get the conversation started. We also got an email last week by happenstance from
Billy Mack.
Billy Mack, asking the same thing. So
Doing restoration.
doing multi-year permit on high maintenance properties.
These things have a long track record.
Annual maintenance problem.
Annual maintenance, okay.
We call it
That
high
works.
maintenance.
Well, annual's pretty high as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but it's annual.
Yeah. All right, so we'll table that and discuss it next meeting. Next thing, agriculture, New York State Shellfish Restoration Plan. Outreach survey, John.
Yeah, I received this survey from from the restoration plan. Restoration plan. I sent it out with the email. I don't know if you got a chance to read it.
I looked over it. It looks like we're way ahead of them.
Mike gave me some feedback. One of the questions was, would you not want to see any species put up for restoration. My comment was just maybe predatory species like whelk or something like that. Mike suggested maybe blue mussels because they might be, well, they're byssal threads and large collections of groupings might smother other things.
Is this part of an aquaculture, or is this just reintroduction of species into habitats?
Well, it's shellfish restoration generally. Could be through aquaculture, could be through transplanting, could be, doesn't have to be aquaculture. It's just what do you want to bring into your waters to try to
We already have mussels, correct?
Yeah.
We're not working with mussels.
No.
Mussels have shown up on their own
Yeah.
sometimes not.
It was like a very basic thing with it.
I mean, I thought I'd just write it in as be careful with mussels kind of thing, His other comment was, he thought that maybe if you create sort of sanctuaries and seed it in order to try to get a reproducing population going, you might want to periodically clear that the results of your seedings out of there in order to remove all the nitrogen that they've absorbed. I thought what I could see coming out of that concept is you could sort of have maybe a rotating band of sanctuaries and remove, open one to harvest as another one came to maturity.
We talked about that, doing that a couple months ago, right?
Yeah.
So that could be another
I think
added
that's-
as a recommendation. I don't know. If anybody got a chance to look at the others, if we had any more input on this, wanted to go
Yeah.
through it.
Mostly they were looking for kind of ideas, and
Well, they had questions. and
yeah,
asked
most of the
for
stuff
answers
we
on.
were already doing.
Yeah, East Hampton is
We're
pretty
like-
much way ahead of
We're way ahead of them.
what they're trying to encourage and.
Should send them a note to come out here for one of our meetings.
Well, I actually went to a meeting with them, with Farley and with a couple of Southampton trustees a few months ago. They were trying to pick our brains as to what's going on the South Fork with this stuff. But they're, developing a plan. This is a questionnaire they came up with for all the towns and town trustees and town boards to answer. So. I'll hold off a little while and, I sent this out if anybody wants to take a look through it again and comments that I can add to the.
What's the deadline on it?
It was December 31st.
Oh.
Marley told me they've only gotten 2 responses, so
Okay. So it's still kind of open.
it's still open. Another 2 weeks.
All right. Thanks, John. David, do you want to do education?
Yeah, just the East Hampton Star coverage of the scholarship name from the Rysam Fund to the East Hampton Trustees Scholarship Fund. They kind of praise that.
You kind of said about time.
Yeah.
And who's got kayaks? You?
Yeah, this summer I had noticed, I took some photos. There were 6 kayaks down the beach from the kayak rack. And I kind of just brought up, maybe we want to put up another rack, and we kind of had some internal dialogue. And we were kind of saying, maybe we should wait 1 more year to see if that happens again before we put up a whole nother rack. Because the lottery is about to open, so we want to see if there's going to be 6 more spots if we put up another rack.
Yeah, last year we have 24 spots. This is Pine Hill Road. We have 24 spots there now. And I think, if I'm correct, there were 36 applications for Mile Hill. So there was, at least last year, enough demand to warrant another rack. And my other thought was those kayaks that were left on the beach might have been people that didn't get a spot.
So
And if
why
we
don't-
provide the spot, they may not go on the beach. I
So
don't
why
know.
don't we agree that if we get
We have storage
36
space at Mile Hill. for
There's
another
one,
rack?
there's space for one more.
I'd like to make a motion. We add the rack. I don't know that we, I think last year and the year before probably demonstrated an interest. And the problem we've had is we've got too much interest in some areas. People don't get slots. And if we had some spillover where we had another option.
Yeah.
I think you'd fill a rack up. I think
Yeah,
Sounds
just do the rack.
Okay, so if we're gonna be hiring somebody to install a rack there, we lost a portion of, like the whole front end of one rack on, Louse Point on the Bayside.
Yeah, I think we should hire somebody to do
We need to
the
get,
repairs and the
Yeah, I
installation.
think we've had a guy in the
Chris
past.
Hamilton has done it. in the
Yeah.
past.
Ask if Chris wants to do it again, if not. we get
yeah,
somebody
line them
else.
up sooner than later.
Yeah, he usually, when I've dealt with him in the past, he's kind of wanted to go around with somebody and say, what do you want me to do? So I think.
I can meet him there. Yeah.
So it might be good if we could coordinate with him to just look at all the. Well, it might be better if we went and assessed what needs repair, what we think
Yeah.
needs repair. And then we could take them around to all the sites in one shot. Job and start on.
Yeah, maybe Settlers Landing too, right?
There are some
We fixed there too.
sketchy rails there.
So who talks to him? Who said, I could meet him at Mile Hill and Settlers or something like that? Or we could go first and then talk next time.
Yeah, I guess, take a look at these sites first and have an idea of what we're gonna ask them for.
Do you want to take a look at Mile Hill and
We'll do Mile Hill.
Settlers Landing?
Settlers.
Just see what needs, I doubt if Mile Hill needs any repairs, but
Yeah.
Settlers probably does.
I'll take a closer look at Louse.
Gerard is pretty good. Yeah, Gerard is pretty good. They're all new.
And then Fresh Pond.
That I looked at recently. That's okay. That's fine.
We'll be using that rack.
There's some kayaks on it. Yeah, I don't think it was filled up. I don't know if they might have been filled up by permits, but it wasn't filled up by actual kayaks.
Yeah, it's on the other side of that.
Somebody uses it though. I mean, there are at least 4 or 5 kayaks on there at one
Yeah,
point.
that was more of like an experiment.
All right, other was
Who
gonna be
seconded the-
Susan, she's not here, so we'll table
Francis,
that.
excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. Who seconded the motion? I know Jim made the motion, but I don't have a second.
I'll second that motion.
Didn't realize it was a motion.
Oh, he made
To
a,
hire, the motion to hire.
well, he made a motion to actually put in the other rack.
And other assorted miscellaneous repairs.
Yeah, I'll check Settlers and Mile Hill.
Anything else? John, you want to talk about, Peconic Estuary?
Sure. I got an email from Barry Volson, Peconic Estuary Partnership, on Friday, asking me to present an update of the Napeag Inlet conversations at the next Technical Advisory Committee, which is next Monday. And we had met with a few trustees, some people from Peconic Estuary Partnership, representative from the DEC, Department of State, Fish and Wildlife Service, back in October.
By Zoom, right?
By Zoom.
Yeah, I was at that meeting, yeah.
And prior to that, there was a meeting that you organized in May, last May, with, I forget who, but Drew Bennett, a couple of us, Fred Thiel,
think there's interest, but it's get the thing on, how do we get the thing, how do we
Well-
get this off the ground?
Well, I think we've got a couple of different paths we're on here. The PEP path is basically following up on the conceptual plan that was done back in 2013, which basically made recommendations that in order to move forward with this, there should be a study done, hydrodynamic study done, to really look at all the parameters that would predict the success or lack of success of, mucking around with the inlets, for lack of a better way of putting it.
That
And
was the
that's-
$250,000.
that was $250,000 estimate at that point. So out of this last October meeting, what we were headed towards was Joyce from Peconic Estuary Program was gonna reach out to Stony Brook, to Henry Buchanan, to get some feedback from him about how much some kind of a study like this would cost. And I was gonna reach out to the author of the conceptual plan, which was Will Bowman from, I forget what.
Will Bowman.
But I spoke to Will, and they actually subcontracted out the part that talked about the hydrodynamic study to another group. And I got in touch with them, and they're in Florida. They're willing to go on a call. So that's where we are now. I'm not sure what the update to the PEP is going to be, other than what I kind of just outlined here. But I thought that we have to sort of decide how, where are we going with this? Because, this whole going down the road of the hydrodynamic study is a very expensive road, and it's maybe a bit of a lengthy road. And we have to come up with something before we, decide that we're gonna bring in the excavators or the dredges.
Well, I think we've got to provide enough, what sort of information or what sort of engineering design would get proposed, but the goals on that design, I think, we all understand what those goals would be. And do we need some sort of demonstration to the agencies that the methodology is sound? And
I think that's what the hydrodynamic study is.
so we may not be able to avoid that. Now, John, you know what the turnaround time on a study like this? What's the duration?
I have no idea.
Okay, well, listen, we're all going down this road together then. But I think we're gonna have to,
But the biggest hurdle at this point probably is coming up with the money. And it's $250,000 10 years ago, could be twice.
Okay, you know
that
what?
now.
Here's the reality. We've discussed this on sort of a fringe level, that we have these Orsted monies that will start trickling in at some point. We, right now, I think our fiduciary frugalness, whatever, we've managed to accumulate funds. And what are those funds for? Those funds are for perhaps something like this. And whether we could find a partner.
Well, I think that's what the PEP's role really is here, is to
And
try to bring people together.
Let's have a conversation, see where it takes, and I'd love to see us start heading in a direction.
Yeah, that project's gonna have to be done by several partnerships from start to
The
finish.
state's gotta be deeply involved. They're gonna claim ownership of the property.
Yeah,
Has there been any change, with the advances in technology, is there a way they could simulate this thing easier perhaps? I mean,
Like a computer modeling? I don't know.
a
Well, I think
computer
that's
model
Is there a way of taking, is it possible to take the study that was done several years ago?
and use the
and-
data and run it through,
Well, no, that, what came out of that study
was the need for another
the need
study.
for this additional study. So
Well, that's like the brown tie thing. The only thing anybody could agree about was it was gonna cost $3.5 million to
study
it. Yeah, to study it, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of, spending money, it's probably something nobody wants to spend all their money on.
Let's hear the pitch. Let's hear the pitch and see
what we
and
can put together.
understand what the study, what the goal of the study is and what we can use out of it.
Who else might be interested in contributing to whatever?
Well, listen, there may not be somebody that's interested in contributing because, it's a little like when we've had people come to us for other projects that we've said, well, one way to fast track this is if you pay for the permitting. The towns, the villages don't have to go through that same procurement process that we do. And study fast tracks this this proposed project. Let's consider it.
If that would work, possibly.
But it's not
The state might have some interest here, the part of the rationale here is to re-isolate Hicks Island as a breeding site, which is now open to predation. So that, state parks might have an interest that might spark state grant money, help with getting, garnering state grant money.
Well, and then we've got the budget on the actual project.
Yeah, maintaining water quality is becoming a bigger and bigger thing.
But, there's a lot of people involved and a lot of people have their own ideas. That's what I'm hearing here, Joyce is very concerned about eelgrass. And for some reason, my take on her concern is that somehow opening the inlet is going to
kill the eelgrass,
negatively impact the eelgrass, which I don't quite understand.
To me, history has negatively impacted the eelgrass. I grew up here. I remember as a kid, Napeague Harbor, Lake Montauk being thick with eelgrass. But you know what I don't remember? I don't remember when that initial major dredging project occurred and what sort of situation was set up, perhaps as a product.
Which original?
The one where they did a channel around the border of Napeague Harbor. I mean, there is a channel that runs.
I don't know if that's man-made.
Oh, yeah,
That's man-made.
that was with the bunker boats?
I don't think God came down and
I don't know.
blew that stuff
I've
out.
never heard any historical reference to any work there.
But I know
And,
that Lake Montauk's channel
that
was-
inlet was very big on the, bay side, way back. It was very big.
Yeah.
And there's not much between southern end of tip of Napeague Harbor and the ocean. So that could have been, a channel from the ocean to the bay that
maybe
sealed over on
was.
the ocean side and left that remnant trench there. I don't know. I've never heard any reference to any man-made work there. I know there were bunkers.
Work with me here, John.
We're gonna see what the Smith Meal Company did down there.
Well, hey, Smith Meal Company had a well and supplied water from Fresh Pond
Yeah.
down there.
They used to keep the bunker boats in there.
Yeah, no. So, hey, listen, the area is not completely pristine. We do all remember, John, you've been around here long enough to remember when eelgrass was pretty much endemic throughout.
There was a huge channel
And
there and there was
would
so much
hope-
eelgrass, it was unbelievable.
As far as Joyce Snowback goes, one of the goals of this dredging project is to get a better flush there, lower the water temperatures of Napeague Harbor, and hopefully be able to grow eelgrass in there again. And,
that's gonna
and
have to be-
subsequently be able to rear a reliable crop of scallops out of there.
Well, that's gonna have to be predicted sort of scientifically.
Yes. And I think there's been considerable work by Chris Pickerel's Cornell Cooperative Extension in there over the years that I think there's probably a fair amount of supporting data that points to what we're trying to accomplish here.
I believe there is, yeah, I believe there, but it's a matter of who's gonna gather all that, or, you know, how that's all gonna be gathered together, because there's different nodes of understanding. Like at the meeting we were at in October, I listened to it yesterday, so it's kind of on my mind now. Joyce made a statement that, as far as she knew, the PEP had been monitoring eelgrass since 2017, and I mean, I remember Chris Smith and Chris Pickerel in there back in the 90s, looking at eelgrass. So, I mean, you know, there's different nodes of understanding, I guess, in different places.
Yeah, it's been working on eelgrass forever.
Yeah.
But that had all kinds of eelgrass. Is there anything else this study would be useful for?
Well, I think we should have the conversation.
Yeah.
And then come back.
I mean, if it would be useful for understanding water quality. Right now, they seem to be putting a temperature on everything.
When is that meeting? I'd love to go to it.
30th. Probably, you get notices from them?
Some of them, sometimes you don't listen. Some of the things I get noticed on, I don't pay attention to.
I know.
Especially when they keep coming from the same person 8 times a day. You know, it's starting to be like white noise.
Yeah. A lot of,
Too many emails. I'll send you what I have. There's a Zoom link on it. I think it's 10 o'clock Monday, January 30th. Well, I'm just gonna tell them what I just told you. She'll probably have some more information on Henry Bokanewicz. I haven't gotten back to the guy from Florida. He agreed. He said he would, he'd be happy to have a call with us, but I kind of wanted to go over that with Joyce and see how, we could have a meeting with the guy from Florida and a meeting with Bokanewicz, or should we pull it all together in one meeting? Or
sometimes it's nice to have a meeting independent so that the meeting doesn't get hijacked by somebody that actually doesn't own the property.
like BEP. Yeah, but you can't sort of start down the aisle and then bail halfway down, you know?
We can have that private.
all right. Move on to administrative, payment of the bills. East Hampton Star, $60.04. Optimum, $167.62. And just as a note, there was a past due bill to LTV for filming the largest clam contest. That was $200 that I approved administratively for payment.
I make a motion to pay the bills.
Second. In favor. No CDs to roll over at this time. Minutes for the for meetings of December 12th, 2022 and January 9th, 2023 are available for review.
Yeah, I glanced over them. I didn't see any real issues with them.
Yeah, I didn't either. I'll make a motion. We accept the minutes.
Second.
In favor? Aye. And is that for both?
Yes.
Okay. And financials for the month ending December 31st, 2022 are available for review.
I'd make a motion, we table that till next month's meeting when everybody's having a chance to look at them.
Okay. Anybody have anything else they want to add tonight? Motion.
Motion adjourned. I'll second that one.
All in favor?